Elon Musk is worried that what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing in Gaza could actually be creating more terrorists. Let's watch.
You're going to leave basically a lot of people alive who subsequently, hate Israel. So really the question is like, how, for every Hamas member that you kill, how many did you create? Mm-hmm. And if you create more than you killed, you've not succeeded. That's the real situation there. And it's safe to say that if you kill somebody's child in Gaza, you've made at least a few Hamas members.
That was during an interview on the Lex Fridman show. Musk's comments come amidst bombshell new reporting in the Washington Post that Hamas intended to strike a blow of historic proportions on October 7th with the expectation that their actions would compel an overwhelming Israeli response, like exactly what's happening. Per the Post, militants prepared for a second phase of assaults amid hopes of inspiring violence in the West Bank and beyond.
Meanwhile, over the weekend, the U.S. conducted another round of airstrikes in Syria, where they killed Iranian proxies in response to an uptick in attacks on U.S. military personnel in the region. Per the State Department, President Biden is currently working with Qatar to negotiate the release of hostages and delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza. The World Health Organization is warning of a dire and perilous situation at Gaza's main hospital amid shortages in electricity, supplies, and medical care after a weekend of Israeli bombing. Palestinian officials say the Al-Shifa hospital is now out of service, and at least 32 people, including 3 newborns, have died because they couldn't continue life-saving care. As of this morning, Israeli ground forces are said to be at the hospital's gates. They say Hamas is using Al-Shifa as a compound, a claim Hamas denies.
So I thought that clip from Elon was very interesting. Elon is now essentially a figure of the right of the conservative world, and it speaks to some differences of opinion that do exist, I think, on the right about what to do. He was making a point there that I have made on this show, despite differences I think we have on what's going on and what Israel should be. There is a very rational concern you should have, even from a pro-Israeli standpoint, that as a result of this bombing and the number of civilian deaths, you will down the road have more Hamas sympathetic, more people joining Hamas, more terrorist attacks on behalf of people who have been radicalized by what's happening, and that's a huge concern.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear Elon Musk speaking in a way that sounds just like a parent, to be honest, a parent of a lot of children, reflecting on how I think anybody, a very human response is to be radicalized, to be angered, to become enraged by the senseless killing of one's own child. And now, of course, we've seen that almost half of the now 11,000 plus people who have been killed in Gaza by the IDF since October 7th are in fact children. You're getting reporting over the weekend of the unspeakable tragedy at Al-Shifa Hospital. The hospital has become not only a refuge for hundreds of people, thousands of people to stay looking for safety in the midst of the airstrikes on Gaza, but additionally is one of the last functioning hospitals remaining in the area. There were photos circulating, videos circulating of babies on ventilators that had to be taken off because the ventilators are no longer functioning. There's no longer power and resources to keep them going. Doctors using manual stimulation techniques to try to keep them alive through the night. Several, as we noted, have already died. And that is not even bringing into account the fact that many people are concerned that the bombing is actually imperiling the hostages that are ostensibly the sole reason or a chief reason of trying to exert pressure on Hamas. Hamas reported, and you can take this with a grain of salt if you'd like, but Hamas reported last week that 60 of the hostages had been killed. That's almost a quarter of all of the hostages that were taken in the first place. And you have the families of the victims of the October 7th Hamas attack in Israel begging the government, begging Netanyahu to stop the killing, sometimes on one level because they believe it's killing innocent Gazans who had nothing to do with their own family's murder, and also because they think it's jeopardizing the welfare of the Israelis and others who are being kept captive currently.
Right. I mean, I think that the main Israeli goal, and you can disagree with it or think it shouldn't be the main goal is to eliminate Hamas at this point. I'm interested in this reporting that shows that basically what is happening is exactly what Hamas anticipated and planned for, that they knew and expected and frankly wanted massive Palestinian casualties to result from their actions in hopes that that leads to violence everywhere else and keeps and does exactly, in fact, what Elon is describing, creates more Hamas terrorists down the line to replace the people who are being bombed. I think that speaks to their tremendous responsibility for what is happening, that they anticipated and wanted. That was their goal, was exactly what we are seeing in Gaza, and it's really horrible to contemplate. Of course, that doesn't obligate Israel to go down the path it's necessarily going on, and I think they should take seriously the amount of civilian casualties they're inflicting now, even from their own rational self-interest, and how this is going to turn out in the future.
Well, given the rather unprecedented and catastrophic volume of civilian deaths so far, again, now it's harder and harder for the Palestinian Health Authority to report accurately on the number of deaths because Israel has been targeting hospitals where so many of the records are being kept about who was dying. But Israel put out numbers last week saying that they had killed 20,000 people, so twice as many as had been estimated by the Palestinian authorities, by the Hamas medical authorities. So who even knows what we're going to see when the dust is clear? But this is why so many people are using the word genocide, not just because a number of humanitarian groups and UN officials and the like have said that this qualifies by the definitional term, but also because if you are Israel and you believe, and Hamas believes, that this is a radicalizing act, then where does this end? If Hamas is right that all of this bombing is leading to more and more people wanting to join Hamas, to resist Israel, to resist the occupation, and to do so by violent means, which I have to reiterate again, that killing civilians is against international law, resisting an occupation is not. But if you believe that that's what's going to happen, then what is the natural course of action for Israel then? How does that make sense for Israel unless your plan really is to wipe out the entire population of Gaza? If you know that the more people you kill, the more people are actually going to end up being added to the resistance to Hamas in the first instance, then what other way is there other than to completely eliminate the population through a combination of genocide and ethnic cleansing?
I mean, my question would be almost the exact opposite. Does it contemplate the situation for people, for activist groups in America, including the Students for Justice in Palestine group and other leftist activist groups who have expressed support for Hamas's actions? Does it matter to any of them that Hamas knew going in and wanted massive Palestinian civilian deaths, anticipated, and is happy about that result?
I think that's going way too far to say they're happy about that result. But if you know that you're going up against a really brutal enemy that's demonstrated its brutality over the course of a 75-year occupation, remember, Hillary Clinton went on The View last week and argued that Hamas had ended the ceasefire on October 7th, but many people pointed out that 250-odd Palestinians had already been killed by Israel in 2023 prior to October 7th. Meanwhile, since the events in Gaza, there have been over 100 Palestinians killed in the West Bank, where there is no Hamas, that has nothing to do with Hamas, by a combination of settlers who are armed by the IDF and IDF soldiers as well. This really, you have to think of as, you don't have to think of it, you have to understand, you have to internalize, you have to acknowledge that this is an ongoing occupation. So if you're asking me, should the ire be directed at Hamas? Well, for two reasons, I think people are not indifferent to that, but it doesn't make any sense. One is that our government doesn't fund Hamas. We're not responsible for Hamas. By contrast, Israel receives more aid from the United States than any other country in the world. We send $3 to $4 billion to them every year and have been doing so for decades. We are literally importing and exporting their military techniques and strategies across the world, including to our own populations. And this is a country that we refer to as one of our greatest allies in the world, the quote-unquote only democracy in the Middle East. So we have much more of a personal investment in, involvement in, and responsibility for the actions of Israelis. Moreover, and we talked about this a little bit last week, if you have a hostage situation, if you believe that Hamas is a terrible bad actor and that they're a terrorist group, what does it mean if the group that's attacking the terrorist group, fighting the terrorist group, kills more civilians and basically calls their bluff? If a terrorist group says, I know you don't respect human life, or let me put it this way. Why would a terrorist group say, I'm going to use a human shield when they know from experience that the group they're fighting against doesn't respect a human life enough to avoid just killing the hostage? And that's what Israel has been doing for the last month, is shooting the hostage, jeopardizing babies in the NICU wards, killing 4,000 odd children, and not even, the deaths are one thing. The people who are surviving and having to kids undergoing amputations without anesthetic in the hallways of hospitals. Doctors, the New York Times reported on the Daily this morning an amazing audio essay on their podcast interviewing doctors at Al-Shifa Hospital, the kinds of wounds they're seeing. The doctors themselves don't have food. Their families are imperiled. Some of their families are being killed, even as they're trying to save the lives of others. It is, I think, one of these situations that we're not really going to understand until the dust clears, and U.S. culpability in allowing this, because we also are refusing to call for a ceasefire, is going to be quite the thing to contend with.
The group that has utterly no respect for human life is Hamas, because they planned this. They got the exact result they want, their own people being bombed and killed and maimed. What government, what representative organization has as an explicit goal its people getting massacred? Because that's like a definitionally terrorist, inhumane group, and to know that they're getting exactly what they want, which doesn't speak to. I oppose Israel doing it to this extent. I don't think we should fund them. I don't think we should support them.
What kind of government supports an occupation of millions of people? What kind of government supports an ethno-state where they have apartheid conditions for non-Jews living within their own national boundaries? I mean, these are questions we can ask about all of these groups, and I don't begrudge them being asked about Hamas, but the problem is here that the country that we fund is not the country that is being posed with those exact kinds of questions that I think are important ones.
Well, we'll have more Rising right after this.